Okay, so my name is Christi Buffington, and I'm a science education specialist at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I am also a globe trainer and a teacher. I teach undergraduates here, but I have also been both informal and formal educator as well. And so today I really want to talk about engaging K through 16 students to ask their own globe research questions using the question formulation technique. And I've been so thrilled to learn about the question formulation technique, or QFT for short. Back in 2015, I learned about it first at a teacher training. And then I at the start of the pandemic, got to attend some trainings on how to do it online. So we're actually going to be doing this process together and asking some questions about globe clouds. So on my title slide, you see here some students rafting the Chena River in Fairbanks, Alaska. And what are they doing? They're all like holding something up in the air. Somebody's got a hand in water. We were rafting the river and collecting globe water quality data as we floated the river. And from that data, we used the question formulation technique to develop research questions. So I honor the people of the lower Tanana Dene lands, Athabascan lands. I work on the Trotheta campus, which is a sacred site on the hill above the Chena River. At the beginning today, I showed the view out of my office. I can look down towards the Chena River, which the lower Tanana Dene name of is the Chino. It's a very important river for salmon migration. And in this picture, you can see students walking down a steep bank to what's called Happy Creek. Now this river got disconnected from its original channel. This stream got disconnected 109 years ago due to mining. And so I want my students to know about the damage done to the land locally and to the fish and all the ecosystem that depends on our waters from colonialism. And so the students are learning about these impacts so that they can then work to heal the land and restore flow to the original channel. And that's why we were floating the river, to be part of this bigger picture. So I utilize the question formulation technique in my teaching and also in professional development webinars like this one. And today we'll focus on four things: the when to use the question formulation technique in the science process. Also, if you're a subject matter expert, it's a really great tool to have in your back pocket, because students like to, they have a lot of questions, but if you don't give them a chance, you're never going to learn what they know and get them excited about what you do. Next is the why. Curiosity is key to what we do as scientists and as educators. And yet often even in Globe, we'll say, oh, you could look at this question and you could look at this question, and teachers go into their classes and they ask their students lots of questions, but who asks the questions? Is it the students or the teachers? So let's flip that and have the students ask the questions. Today, we're going to practice the question formulation technique with a tool I learned from the Right Question Institute, and then I'll close with some tools. So when to use the question formulation technique, and really questions are part of the science process. You could see this globe chart that you should hopefully be familiar with, the globe science process. And often, we've got this ask questions and develop a hypothesis part of it, but really questioning is at every single step in this cycle. And I like to use it at this stage of analyzing and interpreting data. So when my students were floating the river, they got this chart from their globe approved dissolved oxygen sensor. And I could help them interpret the chart, or they could do it themselves with the question formulation technique. So Here's kind of what type of protocols they were looking at, from soil pH to water pH to alkalinity. Here's dissolved oxygen. They were also collecting samples for nitrates. They had a Secchi disc for water transparency, taking water temperature, and also collecting macroinvertebrates. And all of those, could be studied in themselves and in how they relate. But again, they were stumbling on the pattern they saw in this dissolved oxygen concentration graph. So what I did, and I'll share that in a couple slides. I'm kind of going fast because we took a long time in the beginning when I was showing my view out of my office. What we did here is we collected some data. We knew we wanted to focus on salmon because it was a key issue for our community. We first listened to Indigenous elders and knowledge holders. We went on field trips and listened to the issues that affect us locally. We identified a key issue, and that was salmon habitat and stream connectivity for salmon to migrate. And then from that, let's select an inquiry question. And this model is what we use in my work with the Arctic and Earth SIGN, STEM Integrating Globe and NASA, where I serve as the coordinator. You also may know Elena Sparrow, the PI, and she's also the Globe Alaska partner, and then Katie Spellman as well. And they are the investigators on this grant that I work on. And so we use this culturally responsive learning cycle model, where coming in and asking questions of kids or having students ask their own questions is not culturally appropriate. It's first culturally responsive to listen. And then from there, the questions will arise. So that's kind of the when. The why comes next. So I adapted these slides. Our guests will see these are familiar to them. These are adapted from Sarah Westbrook with the Right Question Institute. And what college presidents say students should learn in college are: Leanne Botstein, president of Bard College, the primary skills should be analytical skills of interpretation and inquiry, how to frame a question. And Nancy Cantor, Chancellor of University of Illinois, the best we can do for our students is to have them ask the right questions. Are we doing that with our students? Oops, sorry. I've asked my own college students and they say, no, we don't practice asking questions. So when I introduce the question formulation technique, I use these slides so that they are more open to this method, because surveys from Allison Head, the Project Information Literacy at University of Washington publication, shows that 27% of students believe that college taught them to ask their own questions. And that's all. So let's make one change. And this is kind of the leader of the Right Question Institute at the Dan Rothstein and Lou Satana published this book on teaching students to ask their own question. And I really recommend, if you're new to this process of kind of flipping how you do inquiry, get this book. It's a great quick read and it has lots of examples. So your students, anybody, are ready to learn more when you've asked the questions yourself. So rather than, back to this graph, rather than telling students that what they see in the graph, these patterns, are not patterns at all, because if you look at the y-axis, dissolved oxygen concentration in milligrams per liter, it only varied from 10.415 to 10.445. So they averaged these points and got one representative number, that would have been fine with me. Yet instead, I had them look at this graph for 3 minutes and come up with as many questions as they could in just 3 minutes. And here's the questions that they asked. Is the scale on the y-axis significant? Does the difference between the high and the low amount of dissolved oxygen matter to salmon? And is 145 seconds, it got cut off on the x-axis, is that long enough time to measure? Do we average these data then to compare to another site? So that student's already thinking about experimental design. What dissolved oxygen concentrations are needed for spawning and for juvenile salmon? And then, oh gosh, we collected all this data. What's the average dissolved oxygen concentrations in the Chena River? So in 3 minutes, students asked questions that could frame any globe investigation. So I could have just told them, don't worry about it. And my science brain said, don't worry about it. But yet by giving them time to ask questions, we actually got a much greater understanding of dissolved oxygen. So now it's time for us to practice. I have a couple introduction slides, but actually I'm going to skip those and just launch right into a Google form. And then we can have time to debrief. So I'll stop screen sharing. And I will put in the chat for everyone. And Michael Jabot, he already knows about the Q focus. So that's something we'll be talking about. Q focus is question focus. Thanks for putting that in the chat. All right, so I want everyone to open this Google form. We're gonna run through it together at the same time. So I will screen share the Google form, but I ask that everyone opens it. Okay, and then put some kind of icon. If your camera's off, put a thumbs up or something that tells me that you have opened it. Great. Great, okay, and now you can see my screen here. So we are gonna go through this Google form. You can type in, oh, can you still see it? I moved it into a new window. Can you still see it? Okay, Michael says yes. All right. So I learned at the beginning of the pandemic how to adapt my teaching practice to online. And I went to a webinar by the Right Question Institute on how to do the question formulation technique using Google Forms and Padlet. And we know Jen loves Padlet, so she should watch that recording. So today we're going to be generating a bunch of questions to demonstrate the question formulation technique. And I will make this bigger so you can all see it. There are some rules to follow in the question formulation technique. And there are some steps. So there are 4 major steps and 4 major rules. Step number 1 of the question formulation technique, or QFT, is to produce your own questions. And when you do make your questions, you'll follow the rules and you'll number the questions. And I'll get back to those. Follow the rules. The second step is to improve your questions. You'll categorize questions as either closed or open-ended, and then you'll change a closed type of question to open and open to closed. Then we will strategize and prioritize your questions, and then that's starting to get you to do some meta in the metacognition. You're actually thinking about your thinking and learning, and you're making action plans to discuss the next steps. And you'll share it and then reflect on your learning. And that's truly the metacognition, is reflecting on your own learning process. So go ahead and go to the next page here and follow along all together. And it should look like this. We're going to be taking 3 minutes to ask as many questions as you can about the question focus. And what you will need is a blank piece of paper. You'll need a pencil or a pen or whatever. And if you have a colored pen or marker, that's awesome because it helps to highlight some questions. But if you don't, that's fine too. So number 1 and 2, paper and pen. And when we're done with our 3 minutes today, you're going to have a list of questions. The first time I did this in a webinar, I only came up with 3 questions in 3 minutes, and that's totally fine. This has a list of showing what could be possible. This is related to bees and beehives. So it's just an example. And there are 4 rules. The 4 rules are to ask as many questions as you can. The second rule is to not stop or judge, or to answer any of these questions. The third rule is to write down each question exactly as it comes to mind. And the fourth is to change any statement into a question. So this big one, my college students really struggle with this, not to stop to judge or not to answer any of the questions. They're still stuck on is this a worthy question to ask? All questions are worthy to ask. So take a minute, not a minute, take like 2 seconds and fill in which of these rules will be most difficult for you to follow. Is it 1, ask as many questions as you can, 2, don't stop to judge or answer any questions, 3, writing down each question as they come to mind and changing any statement into a question. So go ahead and click something and click next. And we are going to actually now do this for 3 minutes, and I'll time everybody. Okay. So since the topic, I picked a topic, the Globe Cloud Challenge of 2022, because it starts in 2 days, and it was the topic of last week's webinar. And I pulled up the prompt or the question focus from the NASA Climate Kids website. And I quoted the caption on this picture. The caption says, "Wispy clouds high up in the atmosphere generally make an area warmer. Lower altitude clouds tend to help an area cool off." So we're going to do this. Here's the timer. And go. So now the next step is to categorize the questions of closed or open. So a closed-ended question, like this person raising her hand with an answer of yes or no, closed-ended question can be answered with a yes or no or a one-way word answer. We were talking about the very beginning, do you use are engine block heaters part of your life? That's a closed-ended question. It's yes or no. An open-ended question requires some explanation, like why this lady is dressed up in a banana outfit dancing. That requires some explanation. So go ahead, take a second now and mark your questions. I can see that Jen's already doing it, and put an O or a C next to your question. For each question, put an O for open and a C for closed. And when you're also ready, I know I'm asking you to multitask and have paper and a Google form at the same time. Go ahead and watch me. That's 3 things. Go ahead and click next when you're ready. The next step is to take another look at your question and choose a closed-ended question that you can change into an open-ended question. And choose an open-ended question that you want to change into a closed-ended question. These become new questions with a new number on your list. So for example, on this page, you can see that there was something labeled open. There's a little arrow and a new number and a question that becomes a closed question. And when you are ready to go on, go ahead and click next. And now we are going to prioritize. Typically, I like in the question formulation technique to give a lot more than 3 minutes, 5 minutes, sometimes in groups around a chart. When I was teaching in the classroom, sometimes we would have students, especially if they were struggling with writing, have 10 minutes to develop to actually write their questions. You have to adapt, but now it's time to prioritize. And I like prioritizing 3 questions, but today we're going to pick just one for demonstration purposes. So I want you to pick a question that relates to the question focus. Wispy clouds high up in the atmosphere generally make an area warmer. Lower altitude clouds tend to help an area cool off. Pick a question that you like, that you want to learn more about, that you think is important, and write it in here. And then we'll all be able to look at all these questions. And then also tell us whether you chose an open or ended question, open or closed question. So I'll mute myself and I'll remember to unmute myself before I start talking again. I'll give you a second to type. And now I want to reflect on the experience and what we learned from this experience. And I give some links to the Right Question Institute, to the Globe homepage, and also the source of the image I used for the question focus on the NASA Climate Kids page. So go ahead and write in something that you learned and then click submit, and then we will be able to see everyone's responses. Right now we have 3 responses. And I'll stop screen sharing here and then open it up back to my PowerPoint so that we can actually reflect on this process. So while I'm transitioning, go ahead and type in what you learned and reflect on that. All right, done here. All right, so first of all, what do you think, what was the hardest step for people? What type of step, what rule was the hardest? Asking as many questions as you can, not judging them, recording them exactly as they were stated, or changing the questions and statements into questions. What was hardest for all of you?
For me, I lose a lot if I'm writing down, trying to pay attention to what they're saying. So I actually just did this today in my class. I didn't know it was a thing, but I've been doing it as a result of critiques that I was getting from other professors and asking the students what really works for them, because the bottom line is they're not going to put their head on a chopping block to answer a question all by themselves. So I do a lot of this group type learning. I'd be happy to show you what I produced. It's different. I mean, I'm learning all sorts of stuff right now about how to employ this, but I did want to kind of show you how I did it to see if I'm along the right track. Would that be all right?
I think that'd be super fun, Mitch. Would you let us, I have a couple things that I wanted to get to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Wrap around back to you?
Okay.
Especially
perfect.
if we can stay just a little late. Is that okay, Jen? Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Mitch. And I've presented this with colleagues in faculty meetings, and a couple times one person I work with in particular says, I do this all the time with KWL charts. So with what do you know? What do you wonder? What have you learned? And I said, well, great. Did the students go back and prioritize their questions? Did they change their questions? And oh, well, maybe not. And so that was really interesting. There's part of the process is changing the question, taking an open-ended question and changing it to close. What could you see is a benefit in doing that? And this is here's on my slide. This is what it looked like in the classroom with my students after they collected some globe soil moisture samples. So what's a benefit? What do you think is the value of using the question formulation technique to take a close-ended question, prioritize, take a question and change it from closed to open. So you were refining or improving questions. And then another step, you could see stars on prioritizing questions. So what are some value that we get from this technique in those two steps? Mike, I know you've used this. And you are really great at coming up with question focuses.
There's some
Can't
comments in
say
the
that
chat.
word in front of my friend Dave. You can't use that foci word in front of him.
Oh, great. Thanks for the chat. Yeah, I'm struggling with my multiple screens here. Sarah, yes, open-ended questions lead to inquiry, whereas closed ones do not necessarily. And then it's a divergent, Emily, yes, divergent and convergent thinking. Brainstorming, then narrowing the focus. And I often say how important in science some of those closed-ended questions are, because we're actually looking at quantitative data often. And so by asking, maybe we have an open-ended big picture research question, and then like what conditions affect salmon spawning? That's lots of different conditions. And then if we need close-ended research results, like what dissolved oxygen concentrations are too low for salmon, that could be closed-ended, and students can measure that and find the answer. So Mike wrote in the chat, also shows the value of both types of questions. Very, very awesome. So the question focus is what I am getting better at. And I know I need the most professional development in improving. So I'm so glad that we have people from the Right Question Institute here. One thing that is important is that the question focus is not a question. You're getting people to think about their own questions instead of just stating the question for them. So I often use graphs or data sets. I use images. Sometimes when we listen to Indigenous elders and we're thinking and we're listening, it's the whole experience or one part of that. It could be a whole speech. And I want to show some tools here and then give it the floor back to Mitch, and then I'll open up our Google form because there's a lot of good stuff in there. So some tools for how to use this with Globe and Google Forms is Jen and let's see, David is on here. I don't see
Kevin.
who else. Yep, Kevin.
And David Paget.
And David Paget, yep. We all presented together at a webinar, at a workshop. And so we provided a few Globe bundle question formulation technique forms. And so I'll put these in the chat, these three. The one that we did today is this Globe challenge. And it's great to learn the question formulation technique from the source, from the Right Question Institute. So news and events page has all kinds of updated, this was from May of 2021, But right now there's like a class coming up from along with Harvard. Iman and Katie, you might want to mention what's coming up of how you can get training to use the question formulation technique. And then I just wanted to kind of close with some thanks to my students who have been willing to try this at UAF, and then also before that in Montana, where I taught middle and high school science. And I wanted to thank my Arctic and Earth Science team, and of course the Right Question Institute. So I'll put this up here, but turn it over to Katie and Iman about what's coming up so people can learn about it, and then Mitch.
Sure, thank you so much. I just put a link in the chat to an upcoming online course. It starts in April it's run through the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and it's like our best practices course. So if you want more of the nitty gritty on the QFT, how to use it really effectively in the classroom, and also kind of the philosophy behind it, that's a great class. We also have a free course on using the QFT with primary sources. I don't know if that will be interesting to anybody in this room, but that's coming up too. And I wanted to put the link. There is a higher ed page on RQI's website. Some of it might not be updated, but a lot of that has Andrew's work and writings. And so if you want to check that out, I'll put it in the chat.
Great, thank you. Do you think that we have enough time then that Mitch, you can show what you were working on?
Sure.
Awesome.
So I just want you guys to all understand that I'm a novice at this, and I just started doing this type of intro into my coursework. So so this is a fairly relevant topic for me. So I put a link in, right?
Awesome.
Yes.
The Jamboard, perfect.
So each of the colors represents one cluster of students. And of course, these are all open. It's just, once again, same kind of rules. Don't criticize any questions. Just write down exactly what you want to know. I was answering all the closed questions in class because they were simple. So now I've learned, maybe hold off on that and prioritize. So thank you for that. But what do you think? Am I on the right track here?
I love it. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I mean, there's no one way to have students ask their own questions. So right. The thing that I love about the KWL charts, is it's building off of what people already know. And I love that process. What I love about what you're doing here is you're getting, students are starting to prioritize a little bit, and they're choosing the colors. And they're also focusing, you'll have to explain to me maybe what the different colors mean and how they're linked or grouped. But I see some kind of process there in having them really think about their questions. So I think this is great.
Yeah, okay. So this is the intro. We're starting our new semester today. And just to give the students a clear understanding about working in a classroom based on what their questions are, they'll have a lot more buy-in to it. Instead of me just, kind of dumping down a lot of work on them. I want them to have the buy-in. And one of the advantages of doing it this way is once we get a good clustering of questions, you get to pick the ones that match your planning. So that's how I'm doing it. I think maybe Mike told me that. I don't remember.
And I see some tie-ins where you could, take these existing questions and then go on with the question formulation technique of labeling open and closed-ended questions. So for example, how many systems are included in Earth science?
Well, that's kind of open. I mean, that was one that we talked about in class. I said, traditionally there's the 4 that we talk about, but you can easily add 2 other, you can add the cryosphere, or you can add the anthrosphere. Those aren't typically part of the regular system, but you certainly could add it. Or you could just say, in our system, we're only dealing with 4. That would be a closed-ended question, right?
Sure. So if they labeled it, like if you gave them, so you answered that for them, what if they go back to this list and they put O's and C's and try to think about it? And I guess if I first saw this, how many systems are included in Earth science? As a scientist, I would know that it would be open because it's really hard to define a system and how many of them are there.
Exactly.
However, I think many people, including intro students, would put as a closed-ended question. How many? Could they spit out a number? 10. There's 10 systems. Done. I've memorized it for the book. Oh,
Exactly.
okay. Well, now take that question and change it to an open-ended question. Then they get into who gets to decide if it's a system included in Earth science, or you can see how they could come up with some really interesting questions of how many systems are included in Earth science. If you give them the chance to change that, however they label it. If they label it open, great. Would they change it to closed, and how would they do that? And if they labeled it closed, which is kind of where I'm leaning, okay, now let's change this question to be an open-ended question. And that could be a whole unit in your science class of who decides.
I know. It is hard to remain current. I mean, instead of trying to do some major changes, just do incremental changes over time. And then that way it's less of a hit on me. But yeah, this is exactly what I was looking for at the beginning of each of my units to kind of lead into that lesson that we're going to do. I think I'm following that phenomenal science strategy where we start with some sort of phenomena, and then that's where they'll start generating their own questions. But I do think that there's relevance and importance in understanding the hierarchy of questions, the open and closed questions, and who gets to ask the questions. Ideally, we'd want everyone to ask the questions, and when it's a research question, that gives a lot more ownership, right? That's their project, that's their question, and the students are going out there and they're the scientists and they're going out in the field. So
You raise a really, oh, sorry, Mike.
Go ahead, Jen.
I was just gonna, you raise a really good point with who asked the questions. And
Yeah.
That's what, to me, this technique is so important because every student gets to ask the question, and with the rule of no judging, every single student gets to write the question without judgment. And that just opens a whole world of people having voice, right? I mean, I have seen that so many times where when you're doing something, and especially in elementary school, how many times is it like 4 kids that are always asking the questions or making the statements? And this like gives them space. And all of a sudden you go from 4 participating to 10, right? And then
Right.
15 as they get. And so I think that that's what this does too, that is so important.
Yeah, and I was
Yeah,
gonna,
and I appreciate that, Mike.
when we do it, Jen, like in the classrooms, we have sort of the groups do a report out, right? And I'm sort of the scribe, and it's really, it's absolutely amazing. Kids who I think have been, I'll just use the word dissed, right? They don't have anything to offer. And this question comes out and somebody will say, who in your group asked that question? They point to, I started to point at Mitch, but that's not fair. I'm not picking on
Thanks,
Mitch.
Mike.
But I mean, kids who it appears don't have anything to offer are offering crazy cool things.
No, Yeah, you're absolutely right. And one of the other things is you can have the students log in anonymously. Like I said, they don't want to put their head out there. They don't want to, become the target of some question. I mean, every once in a while I get a student that I'll tell them, I said, I can give you the answer, but you're not going to like it. And they'll take the answer, and certainly they don't like it, but they appreciate the fact that they were given a choice.
Right.
If they don't want to, they want to ask the question. I think that this is a good avenue, that anonymity. And then it also, this is live, so everybody sees what everyone's putting up, and that can lead to that synergistic type of additional questions. That's also an important avenue. So, just trying to keep everything open.
Yeah, I think it's a great tool, Mitch, for your pre-service teachers. I mean, I'm not saying, I mean, it's just a great technique overall, but modeling that for them, because it's kind of crazy. I'm picking up, Christy, you said when your first 3-minute thing, you had 3 questions. So the first time I do it with the method students, it's kind of, it's not great. The second time you do it, nobody wants to be this. We use those big whiteboards, right? So we do that. Nobody wants to be the scribe, because it goes from like 3, everybody has 1 or 2 questions to people, they can't keep, but they go to a second whiteboard or something, right? Because they're writing. Nobody wants to write that fast. I have to sign off, but the other thing I was going to share, another great resource for, it's a great resource K-12, but especially for the elementary teachers. QFT partnered with National Geographic. And so they have you can start the course anytime you want to. That's sort of using the ask phase from geo inquiries, but doing it using QFT. It is, I don't, it's like when we say NASA. If you lead with Globe, you don't get your foot in the door. If you lead with NASA Globe, then you get your foot in the door. National Geographic has a similar effect, I think, on some people. So it's a great resource. So.
I forgot to mention that one. Thank you.
No, yeah, I keep trying to remind people, Katie, because it used to be on demand. Like you get an email saying this course is going to start, and now you could start it this afternoon, right? It's self-guided and things like that. Yep, there it is.
Yeah, so the next run begins next Tuesday, I believe. So you're right on time. But yes, it's.
I thought it started. I thought that was one of the ones where you didn't have to. No,
I do think it is still on your own time. So like though it formally starts or opens next Tuesday, you still have a few more days to register. But yes, thank you for that shout out. Definitely.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's great stuff. Holy cow.
And Mitch, you might really, really like this. This is all geo inquiry questions that Iman put in the chat. And I ran out of time today. Like I'm looking now at all the questions. I have 11 responses. I want to get into our cloud talk now, like talk about the prioritized questions and how they relate to the Globe Cloud Challenge.
Jen, there you go.
We've got all these great, I don't know if anybody else is looking at them.
Well, that was a question you asked, so you're starting off the proper way.
I just want to share with the QFT people. I don't know if it was the session I went to with Dan. There's the Q focus is that chocolate chip cookie recipe. I don't know if it's the ingredients that are in the best chocolate chip cookies. And that's the one I always use with the method students first. And then we debrief afterwards. And their number one question is, well, why didn't you make these cookies to bring in so that we could taste?
That really would have
after my own heart. That's
so funny. I don't even know that one, but that's really funny.
You should use a peach Melba recipe.
Thanks. I could really use one apparently.
And that's a good thing. I've had some failure. Well, not failures, wrong word, growth mindset. I've had some, challenges, learning opportunities in using the QFT where it fell flat. And it's because I didn't have a fun prompt or question focus to start with when students were learning this. you know, I like to, there's so little time that I'm going to go right in the science and not kind of build community around asking questions and prioritizing. So that chocolate chip cookie prompt might be a really good one.
Yeah, don't be.
And then culturally, like sometimes just the pulsing that let's do this really fast is not culturally appropriate sometimes with people with whom I work. And so I'm getting that balance as well.
I was going to tell you not to be too rough on yourself, because I think once they have that experience, the Q focus can be less engaging than it had to be at the beginning, because I think they understand that there's a lot. You didn't just randomly put that up there, right? That there must be some layering of what kinds of questions we can ask. The number one, just the number one, when I do PD with this, the number one complaint from teachers is they don't have time to do this, right? And maybe I'm wrong, so I'm going to learn. So I want Katie and Amon to tell what I tell them to do is to create that master list of questions from the class, right? You prioritize them, and you're going to start to work that way. And so that's kind of freaky to teachers, because what if we don't get to all the questions? Or aren't students mad if their question doesn't make the prioritized list? I was in the 3rd grade classroom. I watched this happen, and the girl was not young scientist was not happy that her question was not picked. They were going through doing stuff, and in the middle of class, she yells out, "Hey!" They found out something. She goes, "That was the answer to my question," right? So it's not that they're not engaged, right? And I just remind teachers that they're still driving the bus. That in the back of your mind, you know what the most important questions are that kids need to address, right? If you're being driven by standards, you're still driving the bus. So Christy has a question that's kind of close to what I want it to be. And I'll say, "Christy, help me understand that a little bit. Did you mean," right? So that question ends up on the list somewhere. So it's great stuff.
That's a great response. That's better than what I would have said.
Yeah.